Welcome, my people, whoever is seeing this live or who is going to see it later. Last week it's been a whirlwind for me the last week. I need to set a reminder for myself to get another tripod for 2 phones, but it's okay. We're gonna make it work. So, last week has been a whirlwind for me. I'm doing a lot of repositioning in my life right now. I am Sara. I spend a lot of my time with other people that are not necessarily usually they're in the world, but pre-COVID, I was in an office a lot. I'm a therapist. I work with mental health and addictions. But since COVID, I've been online, and part of why I'm going live is I've been just kind of dropping little, I guess there are hints. I'm not really trying to be secretive, but I am not the type of person to tell a lot of people what I'm doing until I'm done with it, not because of negativity. A little bit of negativity sometimes, there's a lot of it out there, but a lot of it's because I need to stay focused, and I've had to learn how to trust myself in this process of figuring out what works for me. And because the insights that I have, whether that be from my formal education or from a lot of it is from experience and having just lived a lot of life for 33 years, I have experienced a lot of loss in my life. I've experienced a lot of love, but I also didn't know how to accept that love. And I have learned a lot about how to bring all of those concepts together and have them be what fuels us to be able to accomplish change. So, that's kind of my professional background. I'm going to have to keep announcing it because I think, going live, a lot of people, you're still learning who I am. You've seen me in this journey, but at the same time, you don't really know who I am. Good morning, Rob. Thanks for joining. So last week I was, and still going through a lot. I'm actually working on trying to put myself in a position where I can scale back so that I can receive a lot more. As an example, that looks like I'm working towards selling my car just because I was like, I don't want a car payment. I need to be focused on what's most important to me right now, and that's peace of mind, peace of, just my own peace. And in doing that, as I'm coming to be live, I'm working towards forming a peace community. And I really want this community to be about perspective. Is the biggest thing thus far, is being able to have all of us have a space to come together and share our experiences, because something that I know as a therapist that I don't think a lot of people get to be reminded of a lot is that we're all really similar. We've all been through really similar things, and we can all help each other through that. And as being a therapist who have been through the pandemic, I've been through my own healing, I'm going to continue on my own healing, is that there is an insight and an expertise that I do have that I feel like, if you go to a traditional form of therapy, that it sometimes gets limited because it is designed to be specifically about going all in on the patient and not really able to have a free flowedness to people helping each other and seeing how we can be each other's therapeutic space. And with a little bit of guidance from, myself as being a therapist, and then also my other colleagues, and sharing that space with you guys, I really want to be able to build this community around how we can figure out how to come together, share perspective, educate each other, really accept each other, and be able to be compassionate, and then ultimately change how the system works, because we are part of the system. We are the system. As human beings, our ability to create social capital is way more valuable than any money can buy. So as kind of continuing on topic-based things, last week when I was talking a little bit more about being willing to sacrifice the things that we really want to stay attached to, but we have to consider that maybe staying attached to them is more detrimental to ourselves or our health. I wanted to kind of continue upon that and talk a little bit more about love and what, if we stay attached to love, what it can really do to us. It's a pretty expansive conversation for myself, but I'm gonna try to do my best to keep it narrowed. But part of I guess we'll do a part one to it, is I think the most common, I'll start with the most well-known part of love right now. I see a lot of people talking about the love languages. And love languages, for my journey, were actually pretty essential. When I learned about the love languages, I was at a point where I knew about them, but applying them, I didn't have really, I don't think I had a very healthy, I didn't have a healthy perspective on what love was, because I really just was focused on receiving it. And I think one of the things that I see it talked about a little bit in other people's pages, which I really appreciate, but I don't think it's as well talked about, is the concept of giving and receiving, and how those love languages that we have are supposed to be utilized across all of them, that we're going to have predominant love languages in terms of that love that we give and love that we receive, but how are we using them with intention? And so when I started with the love languages, I really, I considered a couple of things. I considered my places that were of weakness, of like where I didn't feel like I was getting and receiving love. And then I also considered what my strengths were. I am an acts of service person all day. I think it's just part of being a caretaker and a provider. Work in the healthcare industry, so you don't really go into it if you're not a provider, if you're not into acts of service. So that is my strongest in terms of giving love. Like, I would rather show up for you than buy you a gift sometimes, and my friends and family can probably attest to that. But it's also, it does happen to be my strongest receiving of love languages. However, but I do not receive love well. That is a part of my history, my past, of just having to, I think a lot of it comes from having lost love. We don't receive love as well because of old wounds, of traumas where love was taken from us. So for being able to receive and having people be there to support me, that is actually a really challenging thing for me. But I have a lot of value in having someone be able to provide for me. And so something to be aware of is that when we're focused on like our relationships and how love is given and received in relationships, it's not always going to be reciprocated the way that we want. That was another big message for me over the last week or so, is that like the exchange between want and need. Are we giving ourselves both the perspective? Because when we're reacting, when we don't feel like we've received love the way that we wanted to, then we get limited and we're restricted from being able to receive the love that maybe we needed, or being able to see what the need is and being able to communicate that to the person with maybe through the love languages that we choose. But if anything, like a reaction and experiencing the loss of receiving love the way that we wanted becomes a limitation to receiving the love or receiving the need that we need to pay attention to. So when we look for reciprocity in relationships, a lot of times we're met with disappointment. There's another reaction. So I'm speaking on this just mostly because there are so many reactions in one given circumstance that blocks us and becomes a barrier for us to realize the fluidity of what love needs to be long term. Love needs to be a choice. Love needs to be considered something that we give and take with intention, but we also can always fall back on it for ourselves. So for kind of tying back in, to my journey with the love languages, I had trouble receiving love because of something that I didn't feel like I received at a certain period of time. So I was the only person who could return to a point in time to be able to give myself that love. And it actually had nothing to do with acts of service. It had everything to do with another love language of words of affirmation. And this will be one of the first times I talk about my mom here, so hopefully she'll be okay with it. But there was, and my journey and my weight had always been, not always, but I think been a barrier for how my mom and I communicated love, because she didn't necessarily understand how to support me through being different, to being built differently, to being a different entity, but saw all of the love that she wanted to be able to give me, but I couldn't necessarily process it. Now, this is like when I'm young as a child, we're not supposed to really know what love languages are. Maybe that will change in this generation because we're talking about them so much more and we're opening up the conversation. But as that translates into my adulthood, that's still my reality. I'm carrying that restricted ability to process what love and receiving love is for me. That is an issue when it comes to healing. And why does this have anything to do with transformation? Because it has everything to do with how energy flows in and flows out of you. That energy is ultimately what manifests in pounds, in fat. Like it's just, I love food, so I put food in my body. My body stores fat because that's ultimately what food is made out of, right? So if I have that love language, this concept of love and reciprocity, and how we view the ebb and flow of giving and receiving love, ties directly, and in my opinion, clinically and just personally, I think it starts with food, because that is the first form of self-love that we do usually in the day, is putting something into us that's not words, that's not a feeling. So that relationship with food becomes completely tied to how we give and receive love. And so if I had my inability to receive people acts of service, I can see it, but it's like it doesn't really stick. It becomes almost kind of conditional in some ways. It's like, what do you want for this? Do I need to do something, to do that, right? That's where I was at one point. A lot of it was tied to another love language that a lot of times we miss this if we're not careful, like if we're doing our own work, but if we don't have that perspective of being able to see, like, oh, all of the love languages tie into ultimately the ability to give and receive love freely and not feel like it's conditional, not feel like we have to do something to be able to receive something, to be able to do something. I hope I'm making sense so far. I only got I think one person in, but if I'm making sense, let me know. If I'm not, this is why I kind of dubbed it as a kind of a Q&A, is because I know some of the things that I think about and how I process and view the world doesn't always translate automatically to everyone else. So my clients know, they're like, yeah, Sarah, that don't make sense. And I'm like, all right, word, I got you. So let me know if you have and want me to expand on anything else within what I'm saying, if you are in the room, because I do appreciate your presence very much. But so far, I lost my train of thought. Where was I going with that? Giving and receiving love and how it's tied to the other love languages. So I think a common misconception that I see a lot of people get stuck with the love languages is that we have to dwell and focus primarily on the one that is our strength. I wouldn't say it's incorrect, but I would say that you have a lot less flexibility with how you engage within your relationships if you solely base your engagement off of the things that you're good at. And think about it like this. I'm in a very more like physical manifested ways because I'm working towards building my right size. Right size first was, getting myself to a point of health. Now it's trying to figure out what kind of body do I want. And I am working with myself to figure out, okay, what is that good place, right? So think about focusing on your strengths as this, as like the common, I don't know if you guys ever saw this meme, but there was like, you can tell someone who skips leg day because they're like super jacked up here and they got skinny legs. It becomes unproportionate. You are supposed to build your ability to give and receive love proportionately. So if you focus primarily on the strength of giving love, excuse me, of giving love a certain way because you're good at it, you're going to be blocked in a lot of ways, not only just from receiving it that way, but from being able to practice the other ones that you're not good at. And then you just become more limited in the resources that you have with being able to give and receive love throughout your whole entire system. So when you're talking about, like, my love language is I'm a physical touch person, I'm a words of affirmation person. If you only give words of affirmation, my first would be that you probably have difficulty receiving words of affirmation because the things that we give sometimes are just naturally difficult to receive because that's what we just did. We just gave it away. We're providers. We want to give something loving to someone else. But on the flip side also is that you now have other areas in your love languages that you're kind of stuck because you're not that flexible to be able to be like, oh, because you're gonna be a little bit more insecure. So for example, gift giving. You probably may start thinking about like, oh, I hope they like this. You may try to like minimize your own gift giving because you feel insecure about whether or not this person sees this act of love with the same value that you do. One of my flaws is I concentrate a lot on my love language and rarely think about others' love language. Yes. No, oh crap, I like froze. Okay, here we go. Thank you so much for sharing that because yes, is a lot of the times, first of all, this is what I have to say about that. We're designed to be egocentric. This whole transformation has to be about you being selfish. But if we're not careful, one of the things that Miss Portia just shared is that our love languages in terms of our strengths of giving love may be the block of actually reciprocating love because we're not focused as much on how does this other person give and receive love. And I'm gonna be honest with you, it's a lot to take in. It absolutely is a lot to manage. It's okay. That's what it's. If this thing were easy, everyone would be doing it. I actually had a client say that to me yesterday. It was something that their father had said to him. And it was like, if this whole thing about being happy and healthy were easy, then we wouldn't be having as much of a struggle for people to be doing it. So give yourself a break there because this is hard work and those mistakes are ultimately what are going to allow you to be so much more intentional about how you do that for a partner or even for a friend, and even for yourself. And so because you have to start with yourself, you have to know, okay, my love language, my strengths are here, my weaknesses are here. Not that I want to be weakness focused, but the thing about focusing on your weakness is that you ultimately are going to be creating more of a strength. So when you show up for yourself and being like, you know what, giving. So for me, words of affirmation, how I was saying earlier, is that because I'm such a strong acts of service person, that I become limited in my ability to give and receive words of affirmation. It's just not something that I was that good at. So I had to start practicing. How I did that, and I had mentioned my mom a little while ago, just because our relationship, when it came to my weight, I had difficulty receiving that attention to my weight as a positive thing. So it limited I became shy, I became just more reserved and more introverted. Thank you guys for joining, by the way. I'm trying to multitask and like talk and recognize when people come in, but so I had to practice, and I actually started with her. I had to take I read the book, The Five Love Languages. The original version I recommend, then getting into the more specific context of the book, because there's a singles, there's a family, there's like one for youth and teens. And I started taking a look at the relationships that I had in my life, and I was like, where do I struggle with giving or receiving words of affirmation? So my mom was the first one that just made sense. And then I had to make a decision. I had to figure out, and this is kind of at the crux of like why I talk about this with people, is like, what's the value add? If I restrict myself from putting love out there in the world, I'm restricting my own free will of being the person that I am. I am a individual who likes to love people. I don't want to hurt people. I will hurt people in my life at some point because I get hurt. I have to learn to balance that, that empathetic side of myself and build boundaries. Another conversation for another time. But if I restrict giving love, I restrict myself from receiving love. And so I had to make a decision for myself as to whether or not, what's the best return on investment here? Do I stop giving love when I feel like I'm not receiving it? Excuse me. Do I stop? Do I just we all have those relationships where it's like, oh, they don't give me what I need. I just need to leave them, right? Or consider this. Do you take a chance, just like you would take a chance within the stock market, of putting one more chance for yourself to show up and practice giving and receiving love in a more intentional way? Giving that person the thing that they have not given you. And when you do it, and when I say intention, is because you're not going to take this word and just be like, oh, I'm just going to go do it. You're going to stop, you're going to take a breath, and sometimes I definitely encourage writing down your thoughts. Is like, what if I did give this person something that they have not given me? How is it going to be a value add versus a value taken away in my life? Because I had the option to just limit my exposure to some certain people, and my mom included. There's always that option. Put the boundary there and just don't do it. But how is that going to cause, what kind of consequence? Not necessarily a negative consequence. It's not a negative word. We just assume that it is. But what kind of consequence is that going to have for my life? The main relationship where I feel like I lost investment on this words of affirmation, I'm going to be cutting myself off to actually practicing it. Giving her something that she didn't necessarily have a whole lot to give me. That's, I'm not going to blame her for that. Now, keep in mind that the love languages, if you're doing this while you're still expecting certain things from people, I would caution you, just because you're going to be met with disappointment from a baseline standpoint. You could forgive people, is that you never know whether or not you're going to feel a certain way in the moment until the moment happens. So if you know that you're still expecting to receive something a certain way, then I wouldn't recommend you choose to do this right now. But going back to my point is, once you're ready to consider, okay, if I can endure giving someone some love that I'm not necessarily receiving, how much value is that going to actually take from me, or how much is it going to give to me? For my story, it brought probably the most amount of value that any investment I could make brought to me. There's no amount of money that can buy you the ability to genuinely love the moves that you make. and receive the love that you get from people appreciating that. Now, it didn't happen right away, which is why we call it an investment. Health is an investment. I didn't release myself from 160 pounds the moment that I did this. But I do remember there being a feeling, it was after like the third or fourth time, I think, that I gave her a positive affirmation to a situation she was in. And now I'll come back to this, but affirmations are different than compliments. But it was about the third or fourth time where I heard her pause. And I was like, oh, it happened. And this was nothing negative about like why she wasn't receiving it. It's just automatic. We are on autopilot for the majority of our lives because we very rarely ever stop and say like, is this going the way that I want it to? Is this happening the way that I need it to? What control lies here? We don't often stop and just wonder like, could this be any different? We just kind of go and we get swept away with all the things. So that's why I can't blame her. She didn't do it on purpose. She loved me in other ways. She's definitely more of a quality time person. I also was not able, if I blamed her, I would not been able to see what love languages she was good at, what love languages that she received the most. The reason she didn't necessarily give me as much of the words of affirmation, which limited me, was because she didn't receive them. Just the way that I didn't receive them and I didn't know how to give them, she couldn't do that either. Why am I going to blame something on someone if they don't know how to do it? Like, that's where my intellectualization comes in. It's like, if it can't make sense, or if it doesn't make sense for me, I'm like, I can't wrap my head around it. As long as it can make sense, I'm usually pretty open to it. But my point being, when we are able to figure out, okay, that investment of me figuring out, being a little intentional, using a little bit of my time to figure out what would be something that she would really like to maybe hear she's doing a good job at, that she is, I can't remember, I think I wrote it down in my journal at some point about what I had said to her, but just small, deposits. And this is not reframing, because she has called me out on, she's like, just stop being positive, like, let me just be negative. I'm like, cool, I'll let you, feel what you want to feel. This is not to try to change how a person feels about the situation by any means. This is to really, from my standpoint, be able to give something that actually means more to me. This is where it becomes selfish. It has more value to me to be able to give this than it is about her receiving it, because it unblocks the block that I have to be able to give and receive love. And it's not dependent on her depositing it back into me to be able to move along my life and be able to do that freely within my relationships. It's just the most significant value, because that's where it started. A lot of this starts, and this is where the stereotype of therapy comes in. Yes, a lot of our problems do start with our primary same-gendered parent. Same-sex parent, same gender. I mean, unfortunately, I'm going to use them in unison right there, but that's a whole other conversation again, too. But they start with what we have not received from the people who compose the internal psyche, is what a lot of mainstream as we know it. But the parent ego state, if you get involved in my community, you'll hear a lot of the language that I use is our parent ego state is literally the parent that we had. It may not be a same biological parent, but the person who raised us, the messages that we've received. So if I didn't start there because I had the opportunity to, I had a couple of different things going on in my life that I was able to make that investment. It was a pretty big investment to be able to use the energy that I did have left to sit there and reflect on, how do I work on the relationship with my mom? How do I work on the relationship because that relationship is also what dictates a lot of how I engage in the other relationships that I had with friends. There's so much tied to that. That's the route I chose. Choosing any route is going to get you to some point of progression, of growth. And you being able to take the time to sit down and understand the reciprocity that you expect from other people in loving you has to start with the reciprocity of a free way within yourself of giving and receiving love. When I started, when I was practicing with my mom, I had already been practicing with giving myself the affirmation. I had already started with giving myself the acts of service and recognizing them because I had not been showing up to take care of myself, because I had not prioritized my own time, my own resources for the things that I needed. I became imbalanced, not only just in the love languages, hormonally in my body. Stress was also, it caused that tension that ultimately influences all of the mental illnesses that we have, the physical illnesses that we have. Stress is the killer. Stress is the common denominator. I caused myself stress because I wasn't willing to stop. Slow down. Let's go with slow down. Because not everyone can stop. I think there is symbolic or symbolism in the words that we use. I was not willing to slow down, take a look as to whether or not this was a good value of my time, my energy, to get to where I wanted to be. And it all came down to how I was able to build my mindset around giving and receiving love. That is where the value of that came from. Now, this has also been on my mind too. Just real quick, I want to add, and then I'll go back to something I said about compliments and words of affirmation, just to kind of clean up as much as I can because I'm operating off of memory here. But I work in mental health. I talk and I have these conversations with people, sometimes multiple times a day. Depends on what the person's going through, with what ends up coming up that we end up talking about. But the love languages tends to come up quite a bit because at the end of the day, that's how we attend to our needs. But I do these and have these conversations. I'm in front of a mirror of human behavior all day. Just like if you're an accountant, like if you're ever feeling bad that you don't know how to do your taxes, an accountant does taxes for a living. It's literally all, not all they know, but it's all they do. It's all they spend their time on. They become an expert on it. I have become an expert on this, of these concepts, but then mostly just the expert of applying them in my own life to make sure they work, because I'm not going to give anyone insight to what to do in situations in their life, different than advice. I'm not going to give people insight about their options if I don't believe that they work. That's what went into this whole transformation for me, and why I say practice what I preach, because that's like me selling you a crappy product. I don't want to do that. There's no value in that for me. And I do this quite often. I do it every day. However, you do too. You are mirrored by the people that you spend your time with, the relationships that you have. Their reactions are a mirror to what's going on inside of you. So you can pay attention. That's part of what this community, right size perspective, and how you take back your health and you take control over your life, is you have to take a look in the mirror. And that mirror is not just the one that's in your bathroom, or the fact that I'm looking at myself right here. It's with our people. It's with other people in the world. And if we're not getting the results that we want, then there's something to take a look at. And it starts with you. So your right size is really more about what degree of clutter or of chaos, but just what your body has to hold on to, because that's all the manifestation of what's going on internally. Those blockages from giving and receiving love. Just imagine what you could do without that extra weight, and just physically, but then emotionally. And it just starts to happen. You start freeing up the systems to work on their own. I hope I'm making sense to people. Real quick before I wrap up, because I could talk about this for days, y'all. I have so many hours. I don't know, I can't even count anymore. There's like so many hours of having these different types of conversations with people, and they're so different every single time, but they do come back down to, I think, overall, like, same principles is in order to expect reciprocity from other people, we have to be giving and receiving love for ourselves before we can expect it from other people. And so I had said something earlier about the difference between words of affirmation and compliments. Compliments can be words of affirmation. But when I encourage my clients to consider words of affirmation to be something that is, just keep it simple, something that affirms someone. So when you're affirmed by something, I personally think of like, I feel supported, I feel secure, I feel seen. And so that may be, a compliment is typically can be surface level, and it may not actually make them feel seen. It may actually have them see something that you don't really know is an insecurity. So it's like, oh, I love your hair. It's an opportunity for them to minimize it. And that's what I mean by don't ever give someone that you're expecting something in return for them to just receive it, because more than likely they're not going to receive it right away because they are in their own sense on the defense. So when I tell people words of affirmation, think outside the box a little bit. Be like, you know what? I really like how you showed up for that event. I can only see, and you can use yourself as a comparison here. It's like, and you gotta get a little bit more invested in it. Is that, the way that you showed up for that person, I really respect you for that. I don't know about you, but I'm like, most people are not going to expect you to go beneath the surface for a compliment. Sometimes people do, which is great, which I love. Those people, you're special people. But when you're coming from a place where you can't really take on more than the surface level, it's few and far between. Or maybe I was just in that place where it was few and far between for the people that I was hanging with. No shade at all. I was one of them. I was literally not able to give more than like, oh, you look great, because I wasn't receiving. I was not able to receive the love that I really needed. But think outside the box with affirmation of like, man, you know what? I just think about how you're really showing up and doing things differently in your life, and I really commend you for it. It's so general, like that it's so specific to that person. You don't have to get into the weeds of like, oh, what are they, if they're gonna think about it, it's like, if I compliment their nose, like, is that gonna be weird for them? You can make it so general to the point where it matters and it has more value because the person receiving it gets to apply it where they need to. And that is how you take the responsibility of being so, you get out of their lane. You stay in your lane. You're able to really just see like, you know what, I gave that person their flowers. I gave that person some recognition. I gave them validation, and it meant what they needed it to mean. Their reaction over time will show you how they value that. Now, it's not foolproof equation of how to do that, but it's just a perspective on what to consider when you're looking at your relationships and whether or not that you giving and receiving love, you feel like that there's a lot of value there. I was thinking about this a lot this morning, just because if I were to focus on and expecting reciprocity in every single relationship that I had, y'all, I would not have been as successful as I am, whether that be in releasing myself and being healthier. I definitely won't be as successful monetarily, even though I'm not necessarily there yet. I know I will be, because I was there at one point. I missed a couple of lessons in some regard that I really needed to, because clearly I didn't study well enough to be able to apply the lesson in my life moving forward. And I think a lot of it was because I was so distracted by my own love language, what I was good at. I was good at being acts of service, that I missed another person's love language. I didn't give them the affirmation when they needed it. I have to tell myself now, hindsight, that that's okay. It's also what was supposed to happen for me to be able to be here in front of you guys today. But that's where I was said earlier, is that as much as I don't ever intend to hurt people, being so consumed by the things that I love to do can sometimes limit my focus on what my intention is. And my intention wasn't to hurt, but therefore, because I was so focused on other things, I ended up hurting someone, by accident, and it happened. There's only, my actions moving forward as to how that plays out. And I realized that coming back to what I know, and what I knew worked, is to be able to give love intentionally, and making sure that it had to start with me. So that's where like a lot of the last few months is like, you know what, I got to focus on what it is that I need, because I had been so focused on other things that weren't necessarily, I wasn't receiving my own love language the way that I needed to as well. And that kind of goes into it, of how we have relationships, and it gets messy because mistakes limit our ability to connect with each other. And doing this stuff is hard. It's hard to communicate through emotion. It's hard to communicate not knowing sometimes what you need, and trying to figure it out in the moment. And all of that gets kind of, whatever that means to you. So that's my rant for the day. I'll have to edit this because there's a lot of I hope it came full circle. But you're allowed to have flaws. You're allowed to have faux pas. You're allowed to have all of those things. It's when you deny yourself the room to have them that we get restricted in our own ability to love. And when we focus on reciprocity, we lose love long term. Remember, short-term versus long-term investment for your life, not just with money, it's with any resource that you have, and that be people, time, food, sleep. What is the short-term? What is the long-term outcomes that you're looking for? And how do you intend to mostly focus on the long term, given the short term balance that you need to have? So that's a lot of what therapy is. That was a pretty in-depth conversation about, love, but therapy is about focusing on yourself. Therapy is about repositioning, not fixing, repositioning the things that you've been given in life, the love that you've received and the love that you don't feel like you have, and figuring out how you align yourself with what you need so you can get what you want long term. All right, so I say that also to say here at the end, I am building community, so please feel free to share, follow Right Size Perspective. I am building a community of perspective, education, acceptance, compassion, and empowerment, because everyone needs that. And therapists, we're kind of, one-on-one therapy is just not my thing anymore. I'm trying something new and putting myself out there in different capacities. So I'm going to be focused on just adding value to people's lives with the expertise and the knowledge that I have, and that I've collected in a short period of time, that I continue to collect as the days pass. And I reflect on those things, and to be able to give them to you guys so you can do whatever you need to with the information, and interpret your life the way that you want. So we'll see y'all next week, and let me know if you have any questions.